deceptive.
Right.
John, I'll be your guide for the next 45 minutes or so. And there's two rules. It's very simple. Rule number one, stay with me. That means no individuals here or groups over there. As a matter of safety and policy, and no doubt a good deal of liability, we all have to go out together. We all must come back together. And I must lead. And rule number two, if you would, please try to stay on this black pavement as much as possible. The idea is to try to protect what's left of the rim along the edge. So when we get to our first stop, I ask that you remain where you are. Any last minute concerns for a hit on walking on this? Walking on that. Walk. I'm taking a jog or a run right now.
What park are you?
I'll watch it.
Yeah, where's the seat?
Where are you from? How far got wet? After a road trip from Texas to Alaska. And I think 16 winters.
There we go.
You don't say years up there, we say winters. But I've been in Arizona about 5 years.
Okay, I'm losing my breath. You said it was like half a mile.
See, we're just out running. This is a good viewpoint. You can see everything from right here. Well, you just walked about halfway. How do y'all feel?
Tired.
If some of you are a little bit tuckered, don't kick yourself. Remember, you're close to 6,000 feet. You're higher up than Denver right now. I just lose my breath every now and then if I'm not careful. And once again, welcome. And welcome to my backyard, by the way. Being a tour guide, part of my job is to keep an eye on the property after hours. And so I'm here all hours of the day and night. But in the meantime, do any of you have any burning questions about this facility, the crater, the movie? Let me ask you a question. I love pop quizzes, especially if I'm the one giving them. Who among you just happens to know the difference between a meteoroid, a meteor, and a meteorite? I just gave you a clue. No guesses? Don't sweat it, folks. What's that?
I said we've read about this.
Well, 99% of the people don't know either. They probably read about it also.
One's ice and one's...
It's not composition.
Okay.
The clue is actually the order. A meteoroid is just a term for a rock up in space. An asteroid, by the way, is a very large rock up in space. But once the object, large or small, enters the atmosphere and makes light, it has to make light, it's a meteor. Once it hits the ground, it's a meteorite. So technically speaking, this crater is misnamed. It should not be the meteor crater, it should be the meteorite crater. But most folks don't care about it too much, so I'm not going to push it. The U.S. Post Office called it a meteor crater back in the 1890s, and it just stuck. Now, this happened about 50,000 years ago. They say no one was living here when this happened, but if they were, they would have looked around and seen a lightly wooded area, more grassland than a forest. They also would have seen an area populated by giant mastodons, bison, and camel, all grazing the same area. Then they would have noticed a light growing brighter within seconds, mostly from the northeast, until it became so bright it was brighter than the sun itself. Then they would have seen nothing, as 1,000 atomic bombs going off at once was released suddenly. That's the amount of energy released here, 1,000 atomic bombs. But the energy released did not destroy the meteorite immediately, because you have to remember it's made of solid metal. So it first penetrated deep into the ground before it built up enough energy inside of itself to basically explode underground. 80% of the meteorite was vaporized outright. The other 20% was broken up and scattered outside the crater. But every living thing within, say, 14-mile radius of this impact most likely would have been killed or seriously injured. This is a relatively small impact, by the way. Any questions so far?
What is the pumping?
White stuff around it, it's kind of hard to miss. That is the main mine shaft. That's mine shaft number 1. Back in the 1900s, a man named Daniel Barringer thought the meteorite that made this was not destroyed like we know today. He thought it was still down there. And his hope, his fantasy, was to dig up a ball of iron that was as big as the crater itself. So his fantasy, again, was to dig up this big bowling ball of iron that weighed as much as 10 million tons, at least that's what he told his investors. Dig up this big ball of iron somehow and sell it to the railroad for a profit. This is Yankee capitalism at its purest. I think he's from Philadelphia. Anyway, he comes here, lays claim to this in 1903, before Arizona is even a state. This is all federal territory. And with the help of his good old ex-hunting buddy, President Theodore Roosevelt, he very quickly gains claim to land. He starts to dig. So it really does pay to have friends in high places, especially back then. However, he starts to dig in 1903, and sadly, he continues digging in vain for another 26 years. He digs or drills at least 35 holes, blows his entire family fortune before he dies in 1929. But his family wisely holds on to this after his passing, even though it's considered worthless. At one time, they considered giving this away to the U.S. government. The government said, well, we got the Grand Canyon, that's enough, thanks but no thanks. And the Barringers held on to it, and they still own it to this day. The Barringer family, his descendants, still own the crater, and about half a mile around that. But my actual employer is a separate company. It's called Meteor Crater Enterprises. Basically, they own the buildings. They lease the crater from the Barringers. So it's a business association that's lasted at least 60 years. Any questions? By the way, who among you has at least heard of a man named Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, or Schumacher? None of you? I'm not surprised. To me, Shoemaker is one of the unsung heroes of the 20th century. He is the scientist who finally proved in 1960 this is a meteorite crater. Using his methods, they now know this sort of thing has happened many times before, and it will happen again. Unless, of course, Bruce Willis is still alive to go up there and take care of the force. Sorry, bad movie. Anyway, I love Bruce Willis, but I hate the movie. Anyway, the reason why Shoemaker is studying this sort of thing is because he wants to be an astronaut. Who doesn't back in the 1960s, right? In fact, he wants to be the first civilian to walk on the moon. That's why he began studying this in the first place. But sadly for him, he was diagnosed almost literally at the last minute with something called Addison's disease, which is a not-so-minor ailment. John F. Kennedy had this disease. It was enough to disqualify Shoemaker from the Apollo program. But being the man he was, he still wanted to contribute. So from 1963 to, I believe, 1970, Shoemaker helped train the astronauts, including his replacement, Harrison Schmitt, one of the last men to walk on the moon, right here at Meteor Crater. In fact, you may be standing where they stood. Be standing where he stood. Sadly for Shoemaker, he died in 1997, not from Addison's disease, but from an auto accident. One of the world's great scientists was killed, ironically, when he was involved in a collision with another vehicle somewhere in Australia while on his way to study a crater out there. To honor him one last time, NASA sent up a capsule of his ashes with the Lunar Prospector mission in 1998. Once the mission was complete, 18 months later, they deliberately crashed the probe into the surface of the moon. So, in a matter of speaking, he made up there after all. In fact, he made his own new crater. As far as I know, Shoemaker is the first, if not the only human being to have his remains laid to rest on the moon. I think it's appropriate. Any questions before I head on down?